This workshop is called Help with Handwriting. Handwriting is a super important component to literacy instruction. And so if you are homeschooling your dyslexic learner, or if your child is having struggles with reading and writing, working on handwriting can enhance what you're already doing with your other areas of literacy instruction. So, quick introduction. I have been a homeschooling coach in California since 2012. So, I've worked with hundreds of homeschooling parents and their students. And I'm also a certified dyslexia interventionist. So, I have worked with one on one with a lot of dyslexic kids, as well as working with families that are homeschooling a dyslexic child. And so, I've been offering these free workshops since the summer to help parents who are maybe just getting started on their homeschooling journey and realizing that their child needs extra assistance. Or maybe you've been homeschooling for a while and you just need some fresh ideas about how to help your dyslexic learner. Okay, you can share in the chat the age of your homeschooler or homeschoolers and if handwriting is a struggle. A lot of families are homeschooling multiple kids, and you may have kids who are struggling with literacy skills and kids who are not. It's always nice, I think, when you don't have when you have, each child of course is different and unique, but if you have some kids that are a little bit more independent, of course that makes it easier when you are helping your child who is struggling. It kind of balances out a little bit. And then share if handwriting is a struggle, or maybe you haven't even thought about handwriting instruction before. Maybe this is not something that you've incorporated into your homeschooling day, and so you are looking for ways to do that. Okay, so let's go over what we're going to discuss. So, one, why is handwriting important? And it is very important. We're going to talk about print versus cursive. We are going to look at letter formation, dysgraphia, tools and technology, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. Since this workshop is being recorded, we will I'll stop the recording when we do the question answer time. That way people's questions can be kind of private and the answers, we'll have that time aside from the recorded part of the workshop. Okay, so let's talk about why is handwriting important. Handwriting helps kids with reading, spelling, and getting their ideas on paper. So if you have thought about, and this is very common, in fact, many states have put handwriting on the back burner. In California, we just finally, I think as of last year, cursive is being brought back into the curriculum because for, I think about 10 years, it was not part of one of the requirements or not a requirement for kids to learn to write in cursive. And now I think a lot of states are realizing that handwriting, cursive, and manuscript or print is it's really vital to students' progress. And so don't feel bad if you have neglected it, because a lot of experts and teachers and schools have neglected handwriting as well. But it does facilitate your child's ease with being able to read, spell, and get their ideas written down on paper. This is a quote from Dr. Sheldon Horowitz, and he says that in studies, kids who practice handwriting do better at reading and spelling. The reason? Some experts, and there are lots of experts that believe this, believe that forming letters by hand, so actually writing letters on paper with a pen or a pencil, while learning sounds, so this would be at the beginning reader stage, forming letters by hand while learning sounds activates reading circuits in the brain that promote literacy. So they've done a lot of research on this and seen that when a child is writing by hand, it lights up circuits in the brain and it makes that letter learning, like learning the names of letters, the sounds of letters, how those letters work together in words. It makes all of that more, it enhances it if you include writing by hand. Spelling patterns are ingrained by the act of handwriting. So when you have a child write a word and they're spelling the word, they are going to remember those patterns better if they have to write it out themselves. Fluent handwriting opens the doors to other writing tasks. So what I mean by fluent handwriting is the ability to write pretty much without having to think about it, like the way most of us adults write. Like when I'm writing a note to someone, I don't have to think about the shape of the letters, where to write them on the paper. It just comes out. So my ideas are easily transferred to the paper, and we want kids to have that fluency as well. And when they do, then they can write pretty much anything they want. They could write a thank you card. They could write a note to you asking you to pick up cookies after work. They can say and do all sorts of things through writing if their handwriting isn't an obstacle. And then written expression, which is the ability to put ideas on paper. So summarizing, writing research papers, writing essays, writing paragraphs is so much easier with free flowing handwriting. A lot of kids struggle with the act of writing, and I mean in terms of written expression, like answering a short answer question or writing an essay. A lot of kids actually struggle with that, not so much because of their ideas and the composition of sentences, although that can be an issue, but they struggle with it because the handwriting is a burden. It's like they have to climb the wall of the handwriting to get ideas on paper. And by the time they've climbed that wall of figuring out how to get the letters and the words on the paper, their ideas are uh, could be forgotten, or it's just too exhausting. So that's why we want to help kids to be able to express written expression with handwriting that's easier. There's a connection between the motor movements in handwriting and how letters are stored in the brain. So when kids learn that they write letters and in the motor movement of the hand, like going in a circle for an O or starting at the top and going down for a T, those movements help letters get stored in the brain better than if we just have kids reading letters and saying the sounds of letters and not having them write them at the same time. Handwriting should be incorporated into the process of learning letters and sounds. So I know some programs and maybe just practice, some people will introduce the sounds of letters, the names of letters, and then later think, well, we'll have the child write the we'll have the child write the letters later, but in fact, you want to, I'm going to collapse this. In fact, you want to have your child writing the letters as they learn what they look like and the sounds at the same time. So it shouldn't be something that is disconnected and done later. When kids and adults, so back to why is all of this important? Why is handwriting important? When kids and adults take notes by hand, they retain more. So this is true not just for children who are learning, but all the way through high school, college, and even into adulthood, that they found that taking written notes as opposed to type notes is actually more beneficial. And so if kids aren't able to write down notes because the handwriting itself is difficult, then they won't be able to do easy note taking, and they won't have that option that could actually help them learn more. And then writing, as the idea of getting ideas on paper, is impeded by inefficient handwriting. And so we talked about this a little bit, but if your child has amazing ideas, maybe they have a story that they want um, to tell, a written version of their story, they will be inhibited if their handwriting is not easy. And then, you think about how many great ideas kids might have, but if they can't get it on paper, then they may be discouraged and their ideas will never be shared. Okay, let's move on to print versus cursive. So, is there one right way for kids to write? And research is not clear if print or cursive is better. There are, of course, camps on both sides. There are people who think that just stick with print, and what by print I mean manuscript, so letters that are not connected. People think that's what kids see more. The printed letters, in some ways, are kind of easier. Some people think. While there are other people on the other side who think that cursive is especially helpful for dyslexic kids because the letters connect and there's a flow of letter to letter throughout a whole word. But the research doesn't necessarily prove that one way is better than the other. If possible, this is my opinion, kids should be able to read and write in both print and cursive. And I think it's really, helpful. Most kids are going to learn print, they're going to learn manuscript. But when we don't teach kids cursive, I think there's a lot of opportunities lost and things, that they won't be able to read. They won't be able to read documents like the U.S. Constitution or the Bill of Rights or any old document will be difficult for them to read if they don't have a familiarity with cursive. And I was looking at this. This is from Ellis Island. Oh, no, sorry, not Ellis Island. It's from the port of Niagara Falls, New York. I was looking at one from Ellis Island. And, I was thinking, gosh, this is difficult to read, but I can figure it out because I have experience with cursive and it's a little tough. But if I had no knowledge of cursive, it would be almost impossible to read. So you think about all these generations of kids that are coming up maybe without any exposure to cursive, and they won't be able to read primary documents. They won't be able to do research into their family's ancestry. And so I think just that reason aside, it's good for kids to be able to read, um, and hopefully be able to write in cursive as well. Okay, so when you're trying to decide about print versus cursive for your child, take into consideration their age. I've heard some people start with cursive when kids are young. My approach would be to teach manuscript, to teach print first, then move on to cursive. But it is specific to your child. It's an individual decision. Also, you want to ask yourself, is the child's handwriting impaired? So if you're working with your child who has very troubled handwriting, maybe they were in a public school or some kind of school setting and they developed really difficult to read handwriting, or their handwriting is not fluent at all, then you might want to switch to cursive and give your child a fresh start. And I have done this with a dysgraphic student of mine. So I had two dysgraphic students last year that I had to make this decision about. And I work one-on-one tutoring dyslexic kids. Dyslexia and dysgraphia often go together. So I had two children with dysgraphia. One of them, the handwriting was pretty much unreadable. And so instead of trying to repair his print, we just switched 100% to cursive. My other student, whose handwriting was moderately readable, is attending a public school where there was no support for cursive. So I did not switch him to cursive because he wouldn't get cursive anywhere but with me. But with the other child, he was going to get support with cursive. So you want to make these decisions based on your unique circumstances. But if your child's handwriting, if they're a little older, and the letter formation has been kind of set in stone the way they've been doing it for a while, you may want to just start fresh with cursive, depending on their age and the condition of their handwriting. You also want to think about follow through. So if you are able to continue with cursive, like you choose cursive and then you're able to continue with it, that is a great thing. But if there are things going on, maybe you have other kids you're homeschooling and you don't know if you can follow through with the choice to move to cursive, then I would think about the timing of that and maybe put it off, or maybe think through how you can make sure that cursive is attended to if that is the path you choose. And then also be thinking, are you looking to target certain letters that aren't readable? Maybe like most of your child's handwriting is pretty legible, but maybe there are some letters that just aren't. Are you looking to target certain letters, or do you really need to transform your child's handwriting? And I've had students that I've had to literally transform it. Like there was no way to fix it because so much of it was difficult to read and difficult for the child. And we switched to cursive. But there are other students I have who, like I have one high schooler that I'm working with. His A's and U's look almost identical. And I am probably not going to pay attention to any other letter in the alphabet that he writes except the A and the U. Those are the only two we're targeting because those two look too similar. And it is confusing when you read his writing if he meant A or if he meant U, which means that it could look like he's misspelling words. And so we're targeting. So that's something you have to think about when you have your child write. You could have your child write the entire alphabet and then kind of make a decision what you see, maybe just pay more attention over the next week about what their handwriting looks like, and then decide what a good course of action is. Okay, so let's talk about letter formation because it really, really matters. So think about letter formation needs to be consistent. So if you are teaching your child the correct way to form a letter, You need to make sure that they do it the same way every time, because left to their own devices, they may have various ways to make the same letter. Like I've seen students who have made an N going from left to right. I've seen that same child make an N going from right to left. Like they may have a variety of ways that they make letters, and so then that inconsistency makes it difficult for them to have fluent handwriting because they're sort of approaching it in any way and a new way when they come to that letter. So you want to make sure the way you teach is the way that they practice it. With my cursive only tutoring student, I tell him that 100% of the time he needs to form the letters the way I taught him. That doesn't, of course, mean he can't make mistakes, but with me in the tutoring setting, he's going to do them the same way that we learned, and he's going to do it every time. He's not going to be allowed to print. He's not going to be allowed to make his own way or create his own way of forming a letter. It has to be the way I taught him, because without that ease and fluency and automaticity will never set in if the child does not have a consistent way to create a letter or write a letter. You want to think about posture. So where are you working? I've had kids want to work on the floor, and that's not really the best place to address handwriting. Is if a child's kind of on their elbows, leaning on something, in bed, all sorts of places may not be as conducive as being at a desk with good posture. You want to be thinking about your child's pencil grasp. So this is a difficult issue if your child has developed a poor pencil grasp. Like I have a student who literally holds a pen or a pencil with every finger. So all 5 fingers, thumb and the 4 fingers, are touching the pencil at one time, all the time. And I was hoping that we could remediate that and get him into a tripod grasp. I talked to his occupational therapist, and we decided because of his age, it was not going to be possible to undo that muscle memory. And so we just accepted his pencil grasp is what it is. If you're working with a younger child, you can more easily switch them to a correct pencil grasp. And if you're starting with a really young child, teach them the right way to hold the pencil from the beginning so that they don't have to unlearn something. When writing, kids should be comfortable. So they shouldn't be holding the pencil so tight that they have cramping. They shouldn't be, kind of hunched over the paper where it's an uncomfortable posture. And you also want to think about paper position. So the paper should be at an angle to the left if you have a right-handed child, and if your child is left-handed, the paper should actually be going the other way. So those are all things that not only in addition to form, all of these things help your child with their handwriting skills. So you would want to teach and practice one way of forming letters. So you would teach the A, like a capital A. You start at the top from the left, you go back to the top to do the right side, and then you go across. So left side, right side, across every single time. No upstrokes, no other variations. It's just the one way all the time. And after a while, your child will do that without you having to prompt them of the correct way. If they're allowed to practice it their own way, like where one day they do it your way, the next day they do it their own way, that muscle memory will never set in. Some popular ways to organize handwriting instruction include alphabetic. So you just go through the alphabet. The shape of the letter, and this is one of the ways I like to teach letters, is going by how the look of the letter, the shape of it. And then you may be teaching handwriting based on the phonics program that you are using. So let's look at what letter shape instruction looks like. So this would be where you group all of what I call the magic C letters. So these are letters that start off as a C. So you have the C. For an A, you write a C, you write a C and then you turn it into an A. And for the D, you start with a C and then you turn it into a D. For a G, same thing. So with the magic C letters, if you teach the C first, then you can tell a child, okay, now we're going to do the same movement to write an A. It's just going to end a little bit differently. And I think this really helps kids because not a there's not a big variation, and they're able to learn the C, which leads to learning many other letters that look or start similarly. You could also group the stick letters. So that's where we start at the top line and go down. I would not, don't let your child do upstrokes. That's a pet peeve of mine. Upstrokes tend to be really messy when your child starts at the bottom and goes up, and they go up. So you teach the stick letters, go down for an L, go down for T, but then you cross it, go down for an H, but then you add a hump. So you grouping those helps kids to learn them a little bit more quickly and easily. And then another thing I use with my students, especially ones that confuse the B and the D, where there's reversals, which happens a lot, is I say to them, can you see my D? And so as they're writing a D, we say, can you see my D? So they turn a C into a D. And I have them say that because it prompts them to turn a C into a D, because it's almost impossible to turn a C into a B. And so if you're dealing with reversals, that's a really good way to help eradicate that confusion. So while writing, just as a reminder, feet on the floor, paper slanted, the other hand should be holding the paper still. The child should have a relaxed pencil grasp, and they should be comfortable with no tension. And it's okay to take a little break. Sometimes I see my students, need to kind of stretch their hands a little bit, and that's totally fine, and it might be necessary. But you want to try to avoid that tension in the first place. Okay, let's talk about dysgraphia. So dysgraphia means trouble with writing, and it's neurological in origin, just like dyslexia. It often coexists with dyslexia. So you may have a dyslexic and dysgraphic child. It may affect spelling, and it may only affect handwriting. So it presents in different ways. If it's affecting their handwriting, in my opinion, it's kind of easy to spot because their handwriting is very, very difficult. Now, you would need an official diagnosis to find out if it is dysgraphia. You may want to seek the help of an occupational therapist or someone who's trained in dysgraphia, if indeed you think that's what you're dealing with. Some of the things I've done with dysgraphic kids is I've switched completely to cursive. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times trying to fix all of their printed letters is just going to be very difficult because that muscle memory has set in. So switching to cursive gives them a brand new way to write, a way to write that is going to be new, and you can direct how they do it, and you can teach them the proper formation right off the bat, and then they won't be trying to undo their printed letters. They'll just start with something new. You have to have lots of patience for kids with dysgraphia. It is incredibly hard for them to write. It's just very difficult, and they're not trying to be difficult children. If it was easier for them, I'm sure that they would choose for it to be easier if they could. And so we just have to have a lot of patience and expect the changes with their handwriting to take some time. It won't be a very quick and easy experience, but with consistency, it will happen. Make sure you're offering clear letter formation instruction. So don't leave it up to them how to form letters. Teach them. They need to be told exactly how to do it. They need lots of modeling where they see you do it. They should have the opportunity to practice on like a larger piece of paper so they really get the experience of what the letter formation is. And then early intervention is much better than letting the problem get worse, because then children are discouraged, as well as it just being harder to undo all of those habits. All right, let's talk about tools and technology. So supporting students with handwriting. So what are some things you could do? So writing on paper is really important. We are going to talk about tech options because writing on paper is maybe going to be a work in progress for you and your child. So in the meantime, you may need to use technology, but writing on paper, I suggest using paper with visual cues, and we're going to look at that in a second. Um, practice handwriting only 15 minutes a day. It doesn't need to be, I think sometimes parents feel like, oh, it's another thing we have to do, and how are we going to fit that in? You really only need about 15 minutes a day. of instruction and practice, and then just make sure you're consistent with what you've taught your child. So if you teach your child like the cursive S, and you practice it in the context of words, and helping them to learn how to connect the S to other letters, that's your 15 minutes of practice and instruction. The rest of the day when they're writing, make sure that they keep using that cursive S so that they're getting more practice, but it's not practice that's devoted just to handwriting. A suggestion is to use a program, and so we're going to look at a couple, and then choose your battles. So you may not need to fix every single letter in your child's writing. There are some letters you can just let things slide. It may not be exactly like you want it to be, but there's some battles that are not worth fighting. I have a teenage tutoring student who writes his Z from the bottom up. So he starts at the bottom on the right, and he zigzags to the left, up, and then across. So it's basically the exact opposite of the way I would do it and the way I would teach him. But his Z is easily read, and he does it without any effort. So I'm not going to fight that battle because it actually isn't a problem for him. It would have been maybe better if he learned it the right way, many years ago when he was younger, but it's not a problem. So we're not going to fix it, because there's really nothing to fix in that case. Okay, so visual cues. So this is what visual cues look like. And there are many variations of visual cues, but this is one example where the child sees that, okay, number one, where the number one is, that's where we're going to start the letter, and we're going to go in the direction of the arrow. And then we come up and around, and then the second stroke is where we go down like a hook to finish off the A. The visual cues can be super important and really helpful. You could use dots, like this is the starting point, and this is where I want you to end the letter, like a T, maybe put a dot in the top, a dot in the bottom. And we're going to start that top dot and go to the bottom dot and then stop. The letter isn't going to be super tall. It's not going to go below the line, because those visual cues are helping the child know where to go. This is a link, a resource from the Iowa Reading Research Center, and I will send the link in the video replay. But they have some great resources for upper and lowercase, and for different ways to address handwriting instruction, either grouped by systematic, like letters that look the same, or alphabetic. And they have the cues, so you can see there, because you may, as the parent, be unsure, well, I don't really know if I'm doing it right. So if you look at a resource like this, you can make sure that the way you teach the child is the way that is the most efficient and will lead to the neatest handwriting. The problem with upstrokes is that they tend to be, they get a little out of control. Downstrokes tend to be easier to control, which is why most handwriting programs promote that. Some other visual cues are paper that have different lines, like dotted lines or dashed lines, different color lines. So the top line is blue, the bottom line is red. So sometimes that visual helps kids to know where to start and where to stop. There's also some bumpy paper that I've seen where the dashed lines and the solid lines are actually raised a little bit. So then there's that tactile. Your child can kind of feel that as they write, which could be helpful. This is one of the types of paper I use. It's called Sky, Grass, Dirt. So we have the blue at the top is the sky, we have the green in the middle, that's grass, and then the dark brownish color is the dirt. And so we could use cues like, okay, the H starts up in the sky, or up at the sky, and so then the child knows where to start the letter and where to stop. And then some letters go underneath the dirt, like the G goes down in the dirt, the J goes down in the dirt. And so that may help, especially with a younger learner. This is another one that I've used with kids: upstairs, downstairs, and basement. So we had letters like, again, like the H. The H starts up at the top of the house and goes down to the bottom. Some of the letters, like the G and the P and the Q, go down into the basement. And that just is like a little extra hook for your child to remember where the letter should be placed on the paper. Some programs are Handwriting Without Tears, which I would guess many people have heard about or are using. It was developed by an occupational therapist, I was told recently. I didn't verify that, so I should have checked, but that's what I was told. And it is a good, very systematic, easy to follow program. It's not very expensive. There's different versions, like they have the printing and then they have the cursive, and I would suggest that because it's relatively affordable if you're looking for a program to use. You can also be using your language arts curriculum. So, like Logic of English, I think it's their, I don't remember if it's their Foundations or Essentials program has handwriting built in. So, if you're using a language arts curriculum and there's already a handwriting component that's embedded, that may be the best thing to use because it will probably have the handwriting connect to the letters or the spelling patterns that you're teaching, and it's best to integrate that as much as possible. So maybe you have a language arts curriculum and you just haven't paid much attention to the handwriting part. So go back and look at that and see if it looks like it would work for you. And you can always, of course, make your own plan. Like with my the student who I recently switched to cursive, I didn't use the program with him. I just planned out the letters from most common to least common that I was going to teach him. Like the last letter that we learned was the Z because it's very uncommon. And we also learned the X right before that. So you want to, if you want to develop your own plan, just make sure it kind of makes sense with what your child is learning with their reading and spelling, and that you're going in an order that makes sense for your child. So technology tools. So tech may be something your child needs to use in the meantime while their handwriting is being developed, and that is totally okay. What we don't want to do is just give up on the handwriting completely and say, well, he or she just can't write. We're only going to use technology, because I think the research is pretty clear that technology is a great option and a great support, but handwriting, like physically writing words and letters on paper, is going to reap more rewards as far as the reading and spelling. And if you have a dyslexic child, you're most likely working on reading and spelling. And just like with the sky, grass, and dirt paper and the other visual cues that we looked at a few slides ago, those are things you want to use until you don't need them anymore and slowly kind of fade them out. And with the tech tools, you may fade out how much you use them as your child's handwriting skills grow. So for instance, one of my dysgraphic kids, I had him while his handwriting was under development, he would dictate to me what he wanted to say in a paragraph, and I would write it for him. Now he doesn't need that as much. He doesn't need that much support because he can actually write himself. And so I'm kind of phasing out that extra help as it's not needed. So tech tools. So typing can be really helpful if you have a dysgraphic kid and they are really having a hard time getting their ideas on paper with their own hand. You don't want to stop their ability to share ideas just because they can't write. So in the meantime, typing would be a great way to communicate, answer essay questions, whatever it might be. And then they're going to need to type probably for their whole lives. You know, I spend a lot of time typing, and it's not because of my handwriting, it's just because the world kind of requires that. And so you want to make sure your child can type, and then use that as a support while you're developing the handwriting. And then speech to text dictation is, where they can talk into a computer program. It'll type out for them what they're saying, and then they can go back and edit it. That could be a really good support. So let's say you have a fifth grader who should be writing, multiple paragraph essays. If they can't write that yet because of their handwriting, we still want to have them learn how to create multiple paragraph papers. And the way to do that may be either through typing or speech to text or a combination of both. And then co-writer is a pretty popular program that is even better at predicting speech to text. So that might be something to look into. It is not free. Like Google speech to text is free. Co-writer you do have to pay for, I believe. Um, but it's kind of created with the dyslexic child in mind so that it's a little smarter, I would say. And so it may cause less frustration than some of the other built-in speech to text programs.